Welcome back to the Neuroscience Meets Social and Emotional Learning podcast, episode number 113. With Troy Busot, the founder of Athlinks, the world's largest racing database, with a mission of making it easier for people to race more often and have more fun in the process. Hello and welcome back. I'm Andrea Samadi, a former educator who's been fascinated with learning the science behind high-performance strategies in schools, sports, and the workplace for the past 20 plus years. Our initial goal with this podcast was to close the gap recent surveys show exists in the workforce, where 58% of employers say college graduates aren't adequately prepared for today's workforce, with a particular gap in social and emotional skills. Research shows that social and emotional skills like social awareness, self-regulation, growth mindset, the skills that we covered early in the podcast episodes, are crucial for college and career readiness. The outcomes of developing these intelligences are vast as they impact our performance, leadership, personal excellence, time management, and decision-making. And if you've been listening to our podcast for some time, you'll know that we've uncovered that if we want to improve our social and emotional skills and experience success in our work and personal lives, it all begins with putting our brain health first. We've mentioned that daily exercise is one of the top 5 health staples that's a known brain health and Alzheimer's prevention strategy from episode 87, helping us to take our results, productivity, and health to these higher levels. Our guest today, Troy Busot, has always impressed me by the way he and his family took their health and fitness seriously. He's my old neighbor. His family used to live directly across the street from me, but they moved to another state. And now, like many of us, we stay in touch via social media, where we recently connected on some of his latest missions just to brainstorm ideas with our podcast. Not only is Troy the CEO of Athlinks.com, but he also runs the Athlinks podcast, a high-quality podcast that features interviews with athletes around the world as they prepare for athletic events. I'll tell you more about Troy, the company he founded, his podcast, and how he gave me that push I needed to launch my business, achieveit360.com, over 10 years ago. But first, let me tell you about what he invented. He's the founder of Athlinks, the best way to track all of your race results in one place. So basically, it's a results database for those who compete in races. So each year, over 40 million athletes in the US cross the finish line at an endurance event. But with the recent pandemic, these numbers have been reduced to maybe under 10 million. But you get the picture. There's a lot of people who train long and hard, pushing themselves to these higher limits. For most people, it's not about the medals, it's about the results. It's about getting better each race, going faster, going farther, beating a rival, or lifting up a loved one. It's about the hours, minutes, and seconds scribbled on the back of a race bib or on a row on a spreadsheet. Athlinks, or my old neighbor Troy, set out to make capturing those rewards as simple as typing in your name into a search box. This was his idea. And he's the mastermind behind this company who pulls in times for running races, triathlon, swimming, cycling, mountain biking, pretty much any timed endurance sport that you can think of. If they can find the results, they'll add them to the database and link them to their members' account. So how did Troy help me to launch my business idea? Well, I realized that after producing almost 113 episodes of podcasts now, I haven't done one episode on exactly what we do at achieveit360.com. And if you ever make it to the end of our episode, you'll hear the trailer telling you to go to achieveit360.com, where you'll find books and tools for schools and the workplace. I'll do another episode explaining where we began with our work, what we're doing now with workshops to help integrate simple neuroscience in schools and the workplace. So stay tuned for that. But first, let's go back to where this all began around 2012, 2013. It was a year before I partnered with Arizona's Department of Ed with this character and leadership program that I created called Level Up. It was my first huge step towards the vision I had for making an impact with education, character, social emotional learning, and leadership. So where did Troy Busot come in for us? Troy was, and I'd say still is, a very serious businessman. He was always working on something, not much time wasting going on when I saw him. But he'd always say in passing, if you ever want me to come over and brainstorm where you are with your business and where you want to go, I'd be happy to do that. And when he offered, he said it with a serious tone that made me realize he really wanted to help, and I knew he meant it. He didn't mean, hey, we're going to be kicking back and chilling out tonight. Just come over and throw around some ideas. He meant business, and he had this look in his eye that he knew I needed some direction. And at the time, I was taking all the content I had created and was putting it online. I created this online portal, achieveit360.org, where you can see courses for students and educators. It's based on a Moodle platform. And I was working with a young kid out of Chicago, who's not a young kid anymore. But back then, he was teaching me how to create a website, how to code, and everything I needed to know about the online world. And he was a high school student at the time. So once I had my content online, I was ready to do something. So one day I said to Troy, I'd love to take you up on that brainstorming session. And it was the end of the year when many people were in the middle of their holiday celebrations. And he asked me, what are you doing on New Year's Eve? And I almost laughed out loud because every New Year I can remember was always focused on planning and firming up for the following year, not really going to parties or fancy dinners. It's always been a time to reflect, gather new ideas, and sharpen the saw for the new year. So I wasn't surprised that the founder of Athlinks was doing the same thing. So Troy came over after dinner and we sat at my dining room table and brainstormed some ideas for the vision I saw, where I was starting from, where I wanted to go. And Troy offered some ideas, but the most valuable information I remember was the leaders he told me to follow. He said, you got to follow and read Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Crush It. And I did, and it really helped me to create the work ethic that I have today. It was a serious meeting, no joking around. He let me know that he'd seen far too many people never start something, and he hoped that our meeting would give me a push to get moving. It did. It was shortly after this meeting that I presented my ideas to Arizona Department of Ed when they opened up the doors for new vendors to provide their services for this character ed matching grant that they had. We would end up being one of the preferred providers chosen for this grant that went from 2014 to 2020. And this is where everything began for me, working for myself outside of the corporate world with just an idea. I wanted to bring Troy on the podcast because many people I know have been forced to start something new. Maybe their job was eliminated or they've had some sort of shift with what they're doing. And if you were like me, I had this idea ready to go, but hearing from someone who'd launched something in a successful way gave me the insight I needed to get going and learn quickly how to fail forward, which we did. I hope you find this time with Troy as helpful as I did many years ago, as he shares exactly how he launched Athlinks and his vision for the future. Here's Troy Busot. Welcome, Troy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and also for helping me to launch my business almost 10 years ago. Now, Troy, I don't even remember exactly when it was, but I know it was before I partnered with Arizona's Department of Ed and before my programs went into the schools. I'm just curious, what do you remember about coming over to our house that day?
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, it's funny. I have a knee-jerk reaction to hearing people plan and not do. And so not that you weren't doing, but I remember you and I had a few conversations and it was sort of like, Andrea, you're right there. Like you've got this thing nailed. Like you just have to take that next step. And it was a weird thing. It was sort of, it was like a Saturday night where we'd been, our kids were very young at the time. So we spent a lot of time in the driveways in the neighborhood.
Right.
And
it was New Year's Eve, Troy.
Was it New Year's Eve?
It was New Year's Eve. It was absolutely. So I put that in the backstory that you didn't hear, but it was New Year's Eve.
Wow.
And New Year's Eve
right.
for most entrepreneurs, it's planning for the year. And I wasn't shocked when you said, hey, what are you doing New Year's Eve? I'm like, well, planning for the next year. That's what New Year's Eve was for, right? Not for parties or.
Yeah. Wow, you're right. Yeah, that is true. Yeah. So it was New Year's Eve, and it was, yeah, I think we just, popped over and had a couple of drinks. It was the four of us, Majid and Heather as well. Yeah, it was just kind of like, I could tell you just needed a little, you were like a boulder about to tip over. You just need just a tap. There was no tough love involved. It was just a little tap, just I think a little encouragement to get you out of your comfort zone a little bit. And yeah, it's been awesome watching you go on this, kind of spreading your wings and growing your business over the years. It's been fantastic to watch.
Thank you so much. And by the way, the drinks were water.
I think I had something to drink.
No, you didn't. No. And you know why? Because like I totally remember. I thought you were drinking tea. And you said, Andrea, I've never drank tea, because I like you had this little cup and you're like, there's no way it was tea. So no, you came over with water and we drank water. It was a total business meeting, New Year's Eve. We were serious and we planned, and I totally took it seriously. You set the stage. If you had come over with a bottle of wine, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have launched it.
Yeah, really. We just ended up hungover the next day. Wow, that is the worst, most boring story about myself I've ever heard. That's terrible.
That's awesome. So that's the story of Troy Busot and how I launched Achieve a 360.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it was probably as much of I have family members. I am a very, like, if I have a decision, if I want to go mountain biking, I'm kind of like, I'll go buy a mountain bike and be mountain biking the next day. I don't need a whole lot of research or a whole lot of prodding to do things. And that has worked well and poorly for me in my life. I've definitely made some knee-jerk decisions, but one of the things that I think it does is it allows me to recognize that in other people, where I recognize that a lot of people need just a little bit more prodding than I do. And so I'm always happy to sort of be there. Look, if I had thought that you had a bunch of dumb ideas and you weren't going anywhere with it, I probably wouldn't have wasted my time. But I clearly, I graciously gave up my social calendar New Year's Eve to come over and help.
I know.
Help you.
It was the best New Year's ever.
Yeah, well,
Thanks
good.
so much.
That's
Thanks
good.
so much. Well, I was so grateful for that, because it did give me the push and I got going with it and presented. And I actually haven't done a podcast yet. And I mentioned that I have not done anything on the programs and services that I offer. So that's coming up next, because we are going in a different direction. Let's just go back to your story.
Yeah.
Where did your vision start with Athlinks, and how did you go from this idea? I know you don't need any prodding to get started, but how did you go from idea to successful business that sold? And
it's kind of a funny story. I did not come from endurance sports at all, but one of the things that I did like to do, which I always see you and your family doing, is hiking some of the great buttes in Phoenix. So Camelback Mountain, South Mountain, those types of things. And so I just loved hiking Camelback Mountain, and I would do it for speed. So I would try to go up it as fast as possible. And then I started thinking, I wonder what the fastest anybody could go up this was. Yeah. And so Athlinks was originally called Virtue Race. And the idea, and this was like 2003-ish, was that you could basically put in these public courses. And for anybody listening who's familiar with what is now known as the FKT world, fastest known time world, it's basically an engine for fastest known times. So you would have these public courses like Camelback Mountain or the 10K loop in Central Park, those types of things. And then people would go in and add their times to it. Got it. And I thought it was going to be this massive success, and I thought it was a great idea. And so every morning for a month, every single day, I climbed Camelback. I sat up there for a couple of hours and I handed out these little activation cards and told people about it. Like, hey, if you log your time, if you want to know what other people did. And I think in those 30 days, I think I got 2 people to sign up and do it. It was a miserable failure. It was just awful. And so I was driving home one day, if you know the route from Camelback to where we lived, you go by Tempe Town Lake. And I just happened to notice there was a triathlon going on that morning. So I pull over and I'm watching, and I'd always been kind of fascinated by triathlon. Morbidly, I think the way most of us are, like, we know the Ironman. And so I was like, let me stop off and chat with some people. So I just happened to talk to a handful of the finishers, and ask them about, like, well, where do you get your results? How do you track your results? And what does that whole world look like? And they all had the same answer, which is there's nothing cohesive out there. You sort of have to go back to the race website, and then they might be there, they might not be there. It might take them a week to get there. They might take you to some other website. And so I started thinking, like, okay, so basically if I just sort of reverse the ingestion and kind of tweak some things in the software, I could be a pretty good results repository. Because what I had built with VirtuRace was you would own all of your results. And so now, instead of you uploading your own, if they just came in bulk, so I did that. And I went back to the coffee shop that I'd been toiling away at, and I rewrote that part of the software over that course of that week. And then I went to a race, a little 5K, that next weekend, and I handed out those exact same cards.
Wow.
And I said, hey, go to VirtuRace to check your results. And I got home, and I think 50 people had signed up. And it was like, okay,
wow.
All right. So I'm on to something. So it was a classic tale of that big pivot and that's why I'm so big at, you got to start, because at least half of, like any business decision you make, at least half of your business assumptions are wrong.
Totally.
And your job is to find which 50% is wrong and to fix it, and to keep fixing it, and to keep fixing it, and keep fixing it. And then you get to the point where you're 90% right. And then you're attacking that 10%. And then you're going to do a big idea on that 10%. And half of those are going to be wrong. And so, and that's what a lot of, especially startup, but I think it applies to anything in life really, is half of your assumptions are always wrong. And your job is to attack those, start fast, start small, find because what you want are those 50% things to be something you can fix in a week.
Yeah.
But
I
if you
had no idea, Troy, that it started with you on Camelback.
Yeah.
And then the idea that you pivoted, it was the same thing that happened to me when I launched my stuff with the schools. I found quickly that some of the schools wanted brain-based, and I had to quickly pivot. But I wouldn't have known if I didn't get started.
Right. Yeah. And you wouldn't have known, or you would have gone and spent a bunch of money on brochures and a website and all these things that then again, that pivot, instead of it being a short amount of time for you to pivot, it's this massive course correction that becomes very expensive. It becomes demoralizing. If you have employees, you risk losing employees because now they're looking at leadership going, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
Right.
And so you have to, and it's not to say you don't make mistakes. Of course you make mistakes, but it's about minimizing the mistakes that you make by making them more often.
Wow. That's a huge lesson for starting a business. What can you tell me more about the programs and services that you do offer at Athlinks? Like, I know it's not just a database. How do you monetize with your?
Yes. So I sold the business in 2013 to Lifetime Fitness, who is, for your non-US listeners, is a massive, it's basically like a fitness country club. They're much different than a typical gym. So it's a really high value. They're on level with like an Equinox, like a really boutique level fitness club. And they owned and acquired and started several big iconic races around the United States. So the Leadville Race Series, if you've heard of the iconic mountain bike, the 100-mile mountain bike and 100-mile run. They own Miami Marathon, New York City Triathlon, Chicago Triathlon, the world's largest triathlon. So they own all these great events. And so what they wanted to do was own the technology that they would use on race day. And so they bought ChronoTrack, which is the largest race timing business. They produce the hardware and software for actual race timing. And then they bought Athlinks and a company called Bazoo, which is the live scoring and registration, and then the results repository that Athlinks was. So on the B2B side, we offered a very soup to nuts solution from timing to registration to everything. And then on the B2C side, on our consumer facing brands, it was athlete tracking, social race results. We have a database of 350 million race results. So if you have done anything from a 5K to a 100-mile mountain bike race, we've got your results in Athlinks. You just go in there, type your name and claim your results, and then connect with other athletes. So it was a very full service, very well vertically integrated product that we were able to build out over the years.
Well, that was going to be one of my next questions. And I wondered if your database goes internationally.
Very much so.
It does? Okay.
Yep.
And I definitely would not be in there with the little triathlons that I did back in the 90s. But
they're probably in there.
But a lot of my high school friends, they were very into racing. And so how would this help them? They just type in their name and then all of the races they've done pull up and...
Yeah. So really the two main things is, one is that, the Athlinks tagline was all your race results in one place. So all your results in one place. So oftentimes you just forget what you did the prior year. You forget, what you're capable of. You forget how you attacked certain courses. You forget how you stacked up against the local competition, that type of thing. So it was about claiming your results, finding good next upcoming races. So the event calendar and all that, side of it. But really it was a great way for you to track all of your past race history, see how you're stacking up against, you see people on start lines and you're thinking like, well, what the hell are they doing that I'm not doing? So it's a way. We have a feature called Rivals where we show you everyone you've raced against and show your win-loss record against them, time differentials, all that. So it's, some analysis and things like that. But I think the thing that people most often cite is that recon. It's that I'm signed up to do this race. I go in there, I look at all the past results. I try to figure out what's the effort, so, a race like, my favorite race is the Leadville Heavy Half. It's a 15.5-mile trail run in Leadville, Colorado. You go from 10,000 feet to 13,500 feet. And on paper, you look at a 15-mile race and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to be running 7-minute miles. Well, you look at the times and, that 15-mile race is you're crushing it at 2 hours, 30 minutes. Most finishers are around 4 hours. And so by, being able to see all that data and understand that, like this guy who smashed me in this half marathon ran a 3 hour at there, it's like, okay, now I can gauge what my day is going to be like.
Wow, that's interesting. So we've been friends for years, Troy, and I just started to notice that you're posting on Instagram something about 50 chasing 50. And I had no idea that you were 50 and that I'm chasing 50.
Yeah.
And so what is 50 chasing 50? What is this?
Yeah. So you just said it, chasing 50. So there's two components to 50 chasing 50. I am turning 50 this year in October. And so one of the ways that I'm celebrating is I'm doing a 50-mile trail run up in Leadville, Colorado called Silver Rush. And, similar to my personality, I think as an entrepreneur, is just that I want to lean into this 50 thing. For the first time in my life, it's, you sort of achieve that like real proficiency in your career. You get very good at that. You get a little bit of financial stability. Your kids get older and you're starting to, I can kind of see over the horizon that sort of empty nest thing where my wife and I get to think about some of the things that we've always talked about doing. And so, it's like you turn 50, but I really wanted to, again, kind of lean into it. I wanted to chase it. I want to think about like, how do I do the things that will make me at 50 a better person than I was at 40 or 30 or 20. I don't have the illusions that I'm going to be as fast as I was in my mid 20s or maybe as strong, but relative to my age group, I want to be in that sort of, upper echelon of performers, business, family, athletically, all of those things. And so the 50 chasing 50 is in sort of celebration with that. It's an invitation to others to say, whatever your 50 is, let's let's chase it together. And then I've had the idea of shortening it to just chasing 50 and then doing a podcast under that brand where we just talked again, like people like you, where, 50, like think about your parents' friends who, when they were 50,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't look like us. They didn't act like us. It was a very different, um, it was a very different mindset for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
so I want to make sure that, whatever part I can play in other people's lives of spreading that sort of, evangelizing about really embracing your 50s, and not slowing down, like I have a lot of friends who are in their 60s and even 70s. I just finished a podcast with Dirk Friel, who's the son of Joe Friel, who lives up in Sedona, who is like the king of triathlon training. He's mid 70s and still kicking ass. So,
Wow.
these are the kinds of things that I just think it's very easy to slow down, but ask yourself why. Why are you slowing down? What's the point? You don't have to.
Yeah.
You have to adapt, but you don't have to slow down.
And I've been focused on the fact that exercise is one of the top 5 health staples. It's something that it's come out on quite a few podcasts. It's an Alzheimer's prevention strategy. And so I'm watching your pictures of you that you're posting, and here you are running. And I started running, I'd say last August. I started following some of those challenges that you get on the
Yep.
iPhone. And it's like, okay, now this month you've got to run 269 miles. So you've got to do that in the month. And I would look at what I'm hiking. So the hiking trail is 3, and I can get another couple of miles a day from walking around. But the only way to do this challenge is to run. You got to
Yeah.
add in like 5K. Sometimes it's up there like 6 or 7 or 8K. And so here's somebody that's never run before. I'm looking, well, Troy's running all this. I had no idea how much you were running, but I'm like, okay, he's running. I'll try this out. And, then I was able to hit some of those milestones of
Yeah.
running as a new runner and thinking, well, yeah, I'm chasing 50. It's not 50 miles in one day. I think that's what you're going for. Is that what you're
Yeah.
doing? Trying to do 50 in one day?
Yeah.
That's wild. Holy moly.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I always loved about running is the relative nature of it, meaning that right now you are thinking about a 5-mile run or a 10-mile run is like unfathomable, right? It's like, oh my God, that is so far. And like, think about standing at your door and like running to Telegraph Pass.
Right.
That's like, oh my God, like I could never do that.
Right.
But then when you do, you're like, what? Like, wow. Now think about, well, what if I ran to Telegraph Path, ran up it, and then ran home?
Yeah.
And that's what running is all about. Is it doesn't always have to be farther. It could be faster, or it could be the same thing. And just like finding that efficiency in your body is that the first time you go running, you're like a 5K. That's crazy. That sounds like insanity.
Hmm.
And then you do a 5K, and then it's a 10K, and then it's a half marathon, then it's a marathon, and it's like as long as that's your goal, because like don't do if it's not your goal. The idea that people do these crazy things just to do them as these kind of bucket list things, but the desire wasn't there.
Hmm.
I think that's crazy. But as long as the desire's there and there's something in yourself that you're trying to prove, which for me it's that, do I still have, my favorite thing in the world was, with combat sports and wrestling and judo and things, is like, I like going head to head with somebody else physically. And I enjoy getting my ass kicked just as much as I enjoy kicking someone else's ass, because it's just
Right.
the things you learn about yourself. And so for me, with that whole challenge is just, learning something about myself at a time that I think is really critical, to find the things that are going to make me happy for the next 20 years. So I'm
Totally.
sort of looking at like this phase transition of, at 50, retirement is not imminent, but it's certainly within. I don't see myself retiring it, not early, and certainly not at 65. Like I love doing what I do. And so for the next 20 years, it's kind of like, all right, let's start this off on the right foot. And maybe 50 becomes a 100 miler, maybe 50 proves to myself like I did it and that was great. Now let me go do some other things.
Exactly. I think it's really cool when you see something that you don't think you can do. Like we used to see it all the time in the sales industry. You'd be given your sales number and you'd look at it and go, oh, there's no way I'm going to hit this sales goal. And then you blow it out and you're getting commissions. And you're like, oh, bring it on. Let's do next year. And so I could see it that way. And then as we're thinking about health, it was just wild to be given a challenge on your watch. Try this. And you're like, no way, that's not possible. How am I going to do that? I got to run this amount. How am I going to do it in 30 days? And then you blow it out and you're like, hey, I can do this. So what else can I do? If I can do this thing that looks impossible, that everyone around you is like, oh, there's no way. How are you going to ever do that? And then you do it. It's like, it just gives you some sort of boost that you can do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there are certainly dark sides to this, and the world of ultra running is rife with addiction. A lot of ex-addicts turn to things like these ultra types of activities. I have, knock on wood, I've never had a problem with addiction. I've always been very easy to start and stop things and never had a problem with that. So, again, luckily from my perspective, it has nothing to do with that. But you do have to be careful that, again, the desire has to be there, because with things like fitness trackers and, look, there are the best minds in the world, as we've all found out with Facebook and all of these other applications and systems, is they are extremely good at hooking you and bringing you in and making you do things that are totally irrational. I mean, think about the conversations that you see on Twitter where people know, like, I never should have said that, but they do it. They get caught up in this thing. And so that's the downside to things like these fitness trackers is are they making you do things that are not in your best interest, or that you don't necessarily want to do, where it becomes a number, not a goal, type of thing. So there's downsides. I just read a book, and I'm going to butcher it. I'll think of it in a minute, but it's all about that. It's all about addiction and mainly like screen time addiction and things like that, and the downside to all of those things.
Well, it's good to think about that as well.
Well, I think with the things that you cover in your podcast and in business too is, it's kind of like the difference between a lifestyle choice and a diet. Diets are totally unsustainable. So from a health standpoint, unless you're in dire straits and you are, sort of like you have that mandate from the doctor, you have to lower your weight or stop doing any of these types of things. Diets, I think, are just the most useless thing ever. And it's much better to lose a pound a week for 5 years type of thing, or half a pound, versus saying I'm going to go, shows like The Biggest Loser make it look very enticing and sexy. But the reality is that type of abrupt lifestyle change is totally unsustainable, and so it's like setting goals and establishing a business is you have to stay true to yourself, or you're just not going to be able to, if you're trying to run 50 miles just to try to get Instagram followers, it's not going to go very well.
Okay.
It just isn't. You need more than that.
Exactly. Well, Troy, what's next for you? I know that you've got some things that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
Yeah. So the business that I started, Athlinks, I'm actually leaving that in April. So I've got another month or so just wrapping up some projects and get kind of pushing it off in the right direction. And then there's just so many different new challenges out there that I've, again, kind of part of this next 20 years of my career. I love new and fresh ideas and solving problems. And so, I don't have anything definitive to say on those things yet. I'm exploring a few different opportunities, but yeah, it'll take me back to the startup world and starting a new venture here that I've had my eye on for quite a while. So that's what's next for me. Yeah.
Love it. Well, yeah. Troy, I want to thank you so much for offering your time, ideas, and suggestions. First of all, to launch me into the business world in those early days. and then coming on the podcast to share your ideas. I'm so grateful we met and we became friends and stayed friends. Thank goodness for social media. It makes you feel not so far away, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Is there any final thoughts that you have for listeners that might be thinking of starting a business and they might have been like me with this idea, then they just needed like a kick in the butt to get going? What final thoughts could you have?
I would say the two things is first off is start. That's number one. And it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. You know, there's a lot of businesses that could be started with a document or a spreadsheet or some form of value that you're exchanging with somebody, or, you know, just an idea. I think people spend far too much time on that initial prototype and making sure it's all perfect. Like, just literally, you could, if you have a software idea, you can write a flow chart on paper and show that to some people and say, does this make sense? That's a start. You know, that's it. And then second, which I think you proved to be, is be coachable. You know, understand that you don't know everything. You're going to make mistakes. And even if you're your own coach, you know, take that philosophy into other parts of your life. Is know that you're not always right. Know that some number, I like 50 because it's a round number and it feels accurate to me, is that half your assumptions are always going to be wrong. And just be ready to look for that 50 and start attacking it and fixing those things as quickly as you can.
Love it. Love it. Troy, for people that want to find you, what's the best way? You're Troy at Troy Busot on Instagram, but where else could they find you?
That's probably the best place, is at Troy Busot, and it's Busot on Instagram. If you want to look at some gorgeous photos of Boulder, Colorado, and that's where I do the majority of my runs. So it's as good to look at it as it is to experience it. Like, I live in a very beautiful place and do some long runs there. The other side is I'm the host of the Athlinks podcast. So if you want to hear more about and from people who are doing these, you know, amazing epic efforts, or you know, like I had Jeff Katch from the Rodale Institute on not too long ago talking about regenerative organic farming. And, you know, Jason Hardrath, who's the king of FKTs, he's done 100 fastest known times in the last couple of years here. So you know, the wealth of people that I have access to is amazing, and have some really great conversations with them. So I would say those are the two best places. If you have a question or anything you'd love to run by me, you can reach me at troy@busot.com is my email. So yeah, happy to chat.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for everything, Troy, and I'll let you get back to work in Colorado. And you have an incredible day. It's been wonderful to see you again.
Well, thank you for kicking ass and not ignoring the whatever advice I gave you, and just
Over
running
water
with it
on New Year's.
over water under New Year's. Yeah. So thank you for being boring with me and digging out some good ideas that night. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.